human wildlife. Hi, my name is Stephen Vantassel, and I work for a company called Pioneer Wildlife Control, and also Wildlife Damage Control. I'm what's known in Massachusetts as a problem animal control agent. We're people licensed under the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife to handle nuisance wildlife in Massachusetts. No, we're not exterminators, we're not bug killers, we're not pest control. We're animal damage controllers. Pest control companies are licensed under the Department of Agriculture in Massachusetts, where we're licensed under the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. So we have separate licenses, and we're also not allowed to handle poisons unless we have an exterminator's license. Mostly what we do is handle traps, and we handle problem wildlife such as raccoons, squirrels, skunks, etc. But today I want to talk about bats. Those little scary creatures that have been made so famous in various horror movies and scare people even today. The very presence of bats caused a lot of people to think they want to sell their homes. I've had people actually say that to me. But we're going to talk about bats because I want to help you learn more about them so that you can learn how to handle them responsibly and maybe understand more about the heritage and culture that we have here in this area in terms of wildlife. I'd like to begin by talking about a little bit of bat history and bat biology. Contrary to popular belief, bats are not blind. They're not flying rats. They are mammals in the order of Chiroptera, which basically means they can fly. So they're mammals that fly where most mammals don't fly. Usually birds are that fly, and birds are not mammals. Mammals are creatures that are able to give live birth to young. They don't lay eggs. Bats also have the ability to echolocate, which means they emit high-frequency sounds from their mouth, and they can then hear that sound bounce off the objects like an insect, so they're able to have incredible vision, in a sense, at night through their ears. They can literally go into almost a pitch-black area and fly as if there's no problem at all, as they're capturing their prey. You will frequently see bats around power lights at night, where they're able to catch various insects that are attracted to the light, and you'll see them swooping in and out. And especially this time of year, in late August and September, you should be seeing that rather frequently as they're trying to store up fat reserves for winter hibernation. That's another fact about bats. They are true hibernators. As they usually go to a cave, or they'll go inside your house, any place where they can have a medium temperature of somewhere around 50 degrees, and they will go into a deep, deep sleep, lower their heart and blood pressure, respiratory rate, so they can survive until the next spring, until when the insects come back out. Just a point that if you want it for bat safety, every time you disturb a bat that's sleeping, like if you go into a cave, you can consume up to a week of its fat reserves just by waking it up. So it's very important, if we're going to conserve our bat resources, we need to be sure that people don't spelunk in the wintertime. I want to talk a little bit about bats, because there was a time in our history where biologists were concerned about declining populations of bats. And while that is certainly true for some species, the big brown and the small brown actually have learned to adapt to an urban environment. As we have seen more and more urbanization as the cities have spread into what we call urban sprawl out into the countryside, biologists were concerned that there were bat populations declining. And while that's true with some bat populations, other bat populations like the small brown and the big brown that I've already mentioned have adapted to an urban environment. They have learned how to live in our homes. And in fact, chances are, though the evidence is not in yet, is that these populations are actually expanding and that there's been no decline among their populations. We believe in the animal damage control field that the biologists were too busy looking at the woods, and these animals were no longer in the woods. they're in your home. And we have many of our compatriots that are across the country who do this sort of work are finding bat colonies that are absolutely staggering. We're going to show you some footage later on of a major bat colony, maternity colony in fact, over here in Southampton that was recently excluded as of last year. So bats are an important part of our environment. They're insectivores. They consume insects. The bats in New England are not vampire bats. They're not out to get you. They're not over here looking to get into your hair. Although it's possible for them to get caught in your hair, most likely unless you have big hair, as they say, you should be able to avoid bats from getting in your hair. The next thing we're going to talk about is how do you get rid of bats out of your home. Bats enter your home for a number of reasons. One is that they come in accidentally. As bats are flying around at night, sometimes they're chasing an insect and they come in through an open window, come in through a screen opening that may be only just a hair nose big. Bats only need 3/8 of an inch to enter a building. So we're talking about very small tolerances for them to get into a hole. And these bats sometimes will come in where a little gap, maybe you left the door open just a little bit too long. Sometimes they'll even come in through an open chimney. They'll come down right down through the damper, and they'll be flying on your house that way. Other times, bats will enter your home because they're already living there. Generally, the rule of thumb is if you've had 2 or more bat sightings within a calendar year in your home, chances are you have bats living in your house. If you have a bat in your house in the winter time, that would be from any time from mid-November through early March, then you have bats living in your home because the bats would be hibernating in your house. If you also have sightings of bats flying out of your house, or what's called bat guano inside of your attic, then you have bats living in your home. In those situations, we would strongly recommend that you have the bats excluded from your home, and we'll talk about that shortly. Let's talk a little bit more about bat guano. Bat guano is sort of the scientific name we call for feces or crap. This is the excrement for bats, and the way it differs from mouse droppings is mouse droppings are generally scattered wherever the mouse runs or crawls. Bat droppings, by contrast, are concentrated in certain areas underneath where they roost in your attic. So unlike bat droppings, mouse droppings will be here, there, everywhere, where bat droppings will be concentrated into an area, so they'll actually pile up over time. That's difference number one. The second difference with bat droppings is if you take a pencil and you tap it, a bat dropping will crumble because it's literally like dust, the broken parts of insect wings and the parts that don't digest, and it just crumbles. Where a mouse dropping remains firm and hard. We're talking about something that's about the size of, a little smaller than the size of a grain of rice. So again, we're talking about something that's very small. So if you're ever having doubt of whether it's a bat dropping, that would be what you're looking for. Why would a bat want to live in your house? There are basically 4 elements to why a bat chooses your home over another home to live in. The first one is that it's large. Bats like big buildings. Typically they're 2 floors or higher. Second, the house must have good sun exposure. Bats don't build nests. Squirrels build nests, other mammals build nests. Bats rely on the ambient temperature around them. No, they're not cold-blooded. They do have body regulation, but since they don't build a nest, they rely a great deal on the outside temperature to control their body heat. Plus, when they raise young, they huddle around the young, but they still have to leave, so they need the attic of your house to be warm enough to allow them to raise the young. We're talking about ambient or average attic temperatures anywhere from 90 to 110 degrees. So if your house doesn't have good shade, your house is going to be hot enough in that attic. If you stick your head up in there in the summertime, you're going to know how hot it is. They will be attracted to your house. Third, there must be an opening. Sounds kind of obvious, but we still have to state it. Not all houses can be entered by bats. You're talking about that your house needs to have an opening somewhere in it, at least 3/8 of an inch. And it should be an open flyway. In other words, there shouldn't be a lot of branches in the way, getting in the way of a bat flying to your house. Fourthly, there should be water within 1 mile of your house. Open water. It can be a stream, it can be a pond, it can be a river, it can be a lake, but somehow there must be a vast amount of open water for the bats to be able to drink. And they also use that area to hunt for mosquitoes and other flying insects as they go on their hunting trips. So if you have 4 of those elements, your house is a prime candidate for bats to occupy. It may never be occupied in your lifetime, but chances are, if you've had bats in the past, you're going to have them in the future. There's a strong tendency for them to follow the odor of previous bat infestations. So once your house has been infested, chances are it's going to be infested again. In fact, one of the things that people don't realize is bats find their way back into your house not on the basis of sight, but on the basis or echolocation. They find it on the basis of smell. They actually smell their way back into your house, which is an interesting fact that most people aren't aware of. So how do we get a single bat out of your house? Well, the first thing I want to warn you about is rabies. Approximately 2 to 3 years ago, bats, the Division of Public Health, Department of Public Health, changed the rabies protocols. Now, protocols are the guidelines with which we understand how to treat people who get a disease. And in this situation, what they found was that we had a number of people in the country who were dying of rabies, who were mature enough to tell someone that they were bitten, but unfortunately, when they died and they did an autopsy, they found that they died from rabies. And what they believe is that these individuals were bitten while they were sleeping. So the protocol now is, if you're ever in a room alone, sleeping, no one's able to watch you, and you wake up with a bat in your room, you must assume the bat bit you. In that situation, you must capture the bat and bring the bat to your health department, have it tested for rabies. If there's a child 8 years old or younger unattended in a room, whether asleep or not, you assume the bat bit the child, and that bat needs to be captured and tested for rabies. So it's kind of a scary thing the way they phrased it. I want to put some of your fears to alleviate some of your fears. Less than 1% of all bats have rabies. However, you still must follow these guidelines because you don't know which 1% you're dealing with when you have a bat in your room. So it's very important that you capture the bat. And what we want to show you here in a moment is we want to show you how we're going to capture that bat so that you can then do this on your own, so that you're not calling someone at 2 o'clock in the morning, which can be very difficult to do to get them out and help you. We want to make sure that information is available to you. So hold on a minute, we're going to be with you shortly. Hello again. Hello again. We're here to talk about how to capture a bat that's in your room. The first thing you got to do is make sure all the available doors are closed in the room that the bat is located in. So you don't want to have it leave the room while you're chasing it. So we don't have a door here, so we can't really close it. But you'd want to close everything you could close. You're going to narrow the amount of area that bat can fly. If the bat's flying around the room, you want to wait till the bat tires and rests. Usually that may take 15 to 20 minutes. Don't hit him with a tennis racket. Although it may make you feel very good inside to have victory over the bat, the fact of the matter is if you damage the bat's head, it can't be tested for rabies. And so you ruin the reason for the test in the first place. The reason you want to test the bat for rabies is it can save you from shots. Now, the shots are nowhere near as painful as they used to be. However, they're very expensive. So unless you have excellent insurance, it can cost you over $1,000 to go through the series of shots. So if the pain of the shots isn't a fear, the money should be. And it's also not a very good use of resources. So what you need to do, if you have a house with bats in the past, is you want to get yourself sort of a Tupperware type can. Now I use an Ovaltine can. This isn't an ad for Ovaltine, although I do like it. You need to have one of these handy. You also need to have a pair of leather gloves. You never want to do any of this work without wearing good leather gloves. Fortunately, bats have very small teeth, very sharp teeth, but very small teeth, so it's difficult for them to bite through the gloves. So when the bat is resting on the wall, this is our little fake bat here, you want to uncover your Ovaltine or Tupperware container, And you want to approach the bat and simply cover the bat like this, pin him inside. Then you want to take your cover and then slide it in and then get him inside and then close it, and voila, you have your bat captured. Then you can put a piece of tape over it and have the bat brought to your local health department. That's it. Sometimes you need to jiggle it if the bat's hanging on the edge just to get him to drop down inside, but that's the procedure. Alright, so cut there. If you're certain that no one was exposed to the bat and no one was bitten by the bat, like everyone was awake in the room or the child was attended by an adult, if you're certain that no one was bitten, then you can let the bat go. And we'd certainly recommend that. If the bat's flying around, you follow the same procedure, simply closing doors and opening windows and this is the key now, watch the bat leave the house. Don't simply close the door behind you and think the bat's going to find its way out. You got to make sure the bat has actually gone, so you have to visually watch it. So you have to overcome your fear, your initial fear, shock, and being frightened, and watch the bat leave. It's very important. It is very difficult for those of us in the animal damage control field to be called up the next day and say, come and find my bat. Number one, we're not even sure if it's still there or not. It can sometimes go back out the same way it got in your house. Also, it may have left another way that we're not familiar with, or it's still there and it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Bats can fit into very small areas, behind a book, up into lights, around curtains. It can be very difficult to find a bat in a very large room. So a word to the wise is sufficient there. If the bat tires and lands, you can still capture it just the way I just showed you, and if you're certain that no one was exposed, you can go outside and release the bat. Now the way to do that is you reverse this process. But this time you want to be sure that you bring the bat up against a tree. Never release a bat on the ground because it's very hard for them to get flight. So you want to make sure you release the bat against a tree. So you would simply place your container up against your tree branch. Make sure you're wearing your gloves again. Simply post it up there and then let the bat cling to the wall. In this case we have them on a string. So and then you can simply walk away. And that way the bat is going to be off the ground, away from cats and dogs, away from small children, and the bat will simply fly away when he's basically good and ready. If you ever find a bat on the ground outside, like during the daytime, treat that bat as if he's sick and he's a potential rabies suspect. One of the myths, though, of people with rabies is they think they can identify an animal with rabies just by looking at it. That's impossible to do. All you can say is the animal's acting normally or not normally. So you want to make sure that if the bat is acting irregular, you avoid that bat, you call the health officials and have that bat removed so that no one comes in contact with the bat and has to go through rabies shots. That is very important. I'd like to talk about now bat exclusion. The best way to get rid of bats out of your house is to exclude them. That's the most permanent solution, but unfortunately it's also the most expensive solution. Theoretically, excluding a house from bats, excluding bats from your house, is very easy. All you do is you find every hole that's 3/8 of an inch or larger, fill it, and the holes that the bats are using to exit your house, you install a one-way door. So this way, you're able to allow the bats, the house would be here, you allow the bats to leave, but since you have every other hole in the house covered, they're not able to return. You may say, well, why doesn't the bat simply fly back in the way he came in? Well, for some reason, God, when he built them, they never had enough intelligence to make the decision that that's how they came out. So they keep going back to here, trying to find their way back in this way. Of course they can't. It never occurs to them to fly out to here and then crawl back in. It doesn't occur to them. So you exclude the bats out of your house. There's no need for poisons. poisons were once used in this state. Unfortunately, those poisons, some of them were very toxic and had a long residual, and they were potentially hazardous to children. So this is the best way to exclude your home of bats. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, it's very expensive. It requires a great deal of ladder work. It's also very meticulous, so it can take a lot of time for someone to exclude your house of bats. Plus, sometimes they make mistakes and they don't find them all. If they don't find them all, the bats will be back. They'll find the holes that the technician has missed. But this is one kind of one-way door. There are others, but this is the one that I'm most familiar with recently. I've used another one in the past, but this is a very easy one to build. It's just made out of 1/4-inch hardware cloth, and has a tube with a backing, and we just simply put it over the hole, staple it into place. The beauty of bats is they don't chew. So you can use caulk, you can use foam, you can use wood, whatever, silicone, whatever you want to fill in gaps, because the bats won't chew it open. As long as it's going to get somewhat hard and it's not going to stay loose, so then they'll squeeze through, the bats are excluded. This is in direct contrast with like squirrels. Squirrels will chew back in. And I have maybe another video. I'll show you some footage of what a squirrel did when someone thought they were excluded out of the house. So this is how this is a very easy way of doing it. Now, there are some other ways of getting bats out of your home, but it requires some harassment, and they're not 100% effective. Exclusion is 100% effective. But if you want to sort of harass the bats, if you don't really care, you have bats in your house, and you just want to reduce the population in your house, then the first thing to do is cool your attic. That's the number one. Putting exhaust fans, temperature gauged exhaust fans in your attic to really blow the air through the house, through your attic, to get that ambient temperature down. The cooler you can make your attic, the less attractive it is to bats. Now be careful now. The bats may simply move down the wall. Once they're attracted to a house, they're going to be highly motivated to stay. So it's not 100%. Another technique that you can use is ultrasound. However, the research on that is very sketchy, and generally speaking, ultrasound for most mammals doesn't work in my opinion. But for bats, it might work, because at least bats can hear in the ultrasonic range, unlike most mammals. So don't try mothballs. Mothballs are flammable, they're dangerous, they can be a potential carcinogen. And in order for you to have enough mothballs in your attic to drive out bats, they'll drive you out first. So do not use mothballs. I want to talk a couple minutes here about bat houses. There's a lot of, some people like to have bat houses, and there's some basic techniques for making your bat house more attractive to bats. The fact of the matter is, even the best bat house in the best location is less than 50% effective over a couple of years. So I want to talk here a minute about bat houses and let you know what a good bat house is. I'm going to do this one. Now this is a multi-chamber bat house built according to the configuration of Bat Conservation International Research. They have a booklet that you can purchase. Their website is, I believe, batconservation.org on the web. They're a non-profit group that wants more people to love bats. This is their multi-chamber version. If you look down below, I don't know if you can catch that, but you notice all the different slots for the bats to hang in. This bat house can handle approximately probably a couple hundred bats. You basically post this outside, and the bats hopefully will be attracted to it. The best bat house has the following characteristics. Number one, it's big. The bigger the bat house, the more attractive it is. Remember, why would a bat want to leave your house and go into this? If this is very, very small, like those single ones you find, they're the cute ones you see in a lot of hardware stores. Those are not good bat houses. Second, your bat house should be of rough wood. You got to give the place a place for the bat to hang on to when he's inside. Second, what we would want you to do with this one is paint at least half of this black. Bats need heat. So this is the problem when you put your bat house up in a tree and it gets too much shade. You need to be sure that your bat house has at least 10 hours of direct sun exposure daily in the summertime. So the best place to put your bat house is on a pole in the middle of a field so it has good sun exposure. It also helps, the pole also helps protect it from other animals. So you want to paint half of it black, put it on a pole, make sure it gets good rain exposure. Bats like a lot of heat. You say, what happens if it gets too hot? Well, this is why you want a big bat house, because the bats will simply crawl farther down the wall if it gets too hot. If it gets too cold, they'll climb back up. And they'll huddle closer together if it's too cold, or they'll spread farther apart if it gets too hot. They're God built them able to adapt in a lot of ways, but the hotter you can get this in the northern regions that we're living in, the better. So you want to get a hold of one of those Bat Conservation International booklets, and they really give you a lot of good tips. What do you do if bees start getting into here? Do not spray insecticides, because you'll ruin the possibility of this being used for bats. The insecticide's lethal for bats as well. So you want to be sure that you take a garden hose and spray out the bee's nest with the garden hose. That way you're not going to contaminate your bat house. So let's go over that again. You want a lot of heat. You want to paint part of this black. Good sun exposure. You want to have good flight path for the bats. And then finally, you need patience. Bats, it may take several years before bats decide to live in your bat house. So don't expect to have immediate success right away. One of the things you have to think about when you have bats is a disease called histoplasmosis. Histoplasmosis is caused by the fungus that grows in wet bat droppings. And what happens is if you have a lot of droppings in your attic and you stir up those droppings, those spores from the fungus become airborne. You breathe and you suck all those microbes into your lungs, those spores I should say, and you can get a lung infection that's known as histoplasmosis. The way to protect yourself from histoplasmosis is obtaining a face mask with HEPA filters inside. Now HEPA means high efficiency particulate air filter, and it should filter down to 0.3 microns. I like to go an extra step when I'm using this mask, and I have what's called an organic filter as well, which is charcoal. Better yet, it's probably better that you don't do a lot of disturbing of your bat droppings and maybe hire a professional. But if you do have to go up into an attic, try to disturb them as little as possible. Try to get as much airflow into that attic as possible to air it out. Another thing that can help is wetting down the fecal material with a 10% bleach solution so that the bleach can help kill any of the fungus that's growing in the droppings, and might kill some other things too that we don't want around. And it also helps keep dust down, because that's the key. Once you start disturbing the droppings, the dust kicks up and you breathe it. So you want to be sure you're properly protected. Now, if you don't know how to use one of these, it's important to get some training. You should do what's called a positive and negative test. Let me just try to show you what that should consist of here as I put it on. You should be clean shaven.